Hey there and welcome back. In this video, let's look at some simple settings you can apply in OBS to make your condenser mic sound amazing. Let's dive in. Alright, so the first thing we want to do is go to File and go to Settings and go to the Audio section and look at this meters section here and make sure the peak meter type, by default it's usually at sample peak. Just change that to true peak. What that does is it basically, so let me change this back to sample peak and click on apply. Okay, and this band that you see here from -20 all the way to like -11, it says that this is basically the band where the microphone peaks, and OBS thinks that this is when you cross this boundary, the microphone, your signal starts to distort. So what we'll do is, this is an estimation by OBS obviously, so what we'll do is we'll change this to true peak um, for us to get an estimate of what the actual peak range really is. So when I click on apply, all right, you'll notice that this is now changed from about -13 something to about -2 something, right? So this is the range that we'll be able to operate in. So what we're going to do now is, once you set this and click OK, all right, this is basically our housekeeping before we even begin. And now let's get into adding filters on your condenser mic. So what I have here is a Fifine T732 something. It's a pretty inexpensive condenser mic, and nowadays there are a lot of budget mics. Most of the streamers, when they start off, they want to get in using a condenser mic. So if you have something like this is going to really help you up your sound quality by a great extent. So I believe that you already know how to add your audio source into OBS. If you can just click on the plus button here and click on audio input capture and choose your condenser mic in the drop down. So when you first connect your mic to your PC, this is how it's going to sound like. And I'm referring to USB plug and play mics. They should also be similar for XLR mics, although some of the XLR audio interfaces, they come in with built-in noise cancellation. But if you don't have that, then you can follow along. Basically, it's the same settings and it's going to work fine. We'll go and right click on the mic and click on filters. And the first thing we're going to do is add a noise suppression filter. And if you click on the plus icon here, it's going to show you noise suppression. And you can already hear that kicking in. What we're using is RNN noise. Now, if you have an NVIDIA card, you can also use the NVIDIA noise removal. It comes with the NVIDIA SDK or the NVIDIA broadcast software, which we'll get into later in this video. But OBS out of the box comes with speaks and RNN noise. If you have a CPU that's anything above 900K Intel or anything above 2600K, you can go 2600X. You can always go with RNN noise. It works great. Okay, let me just shut down my iLeo here. It basically asks me to take a break every 15 minutes, which is good. All right, so we have RNN noise. You can already hear it kicking in. It's cut out all of the noise that was previously getting captured by condenser mics. And the thing with condenser mics is they're inexpensive, but they are very sensitive and they capture literally everything. So if you have, so I'm pretty close to the wall. It also captures some of the echo, some of the rumbling in the room. This is a good point to, cancel all of that. All right, so earlier in the video, I mentioned about using the NVIDIA SDK. So how we're going to do that is just go to Google and you can type in NVIDIA Audio SDK, and it's going to get you to this website result that says NVIDIA Broadcast Download Resources. So click on that and scroll down. You're going to see audio and video effects. Both of these are great. So if you want like background removal like I did on the video, you can always download the SDK based on the card type you have. For the audio, again, download the one that you have based on the card. I have a 3060 Ti, so I would go for the RDX 30 series and click on the download button here. Now there's another option with NVIDIA where they have something called the NVIDIA Broadcast. So I'm going to search for NVIDIA Broadcast And this is basically a software that NVIDIA has that looks like this on the right, where you can use your camera, make those effects work within the broadcast software and bring that in to OBS. And there's also a setting for microphone, which allows you to remove noise, which also shows up in OBS. All right, so click on the download now button. This is an application, install it, and it should work out of the box. Now, if you're in a noise treated or audio treated room, what you can do is instead of using a noise suppression, you can actually use a noise gate. What a noise gate does is it basically only starts the mic when it crosses a certain threshold. For my purpose, I'm going to get rid of noise gate. I don't think I need that. Noise suppression works fine. Now, the next thing we're going to do is add an expander. Now, as the name explains, this is going to expand or open the mic when it crosses a certain threshold. Usually human speech is between -45 to -55. And when you're shouting, it kind of goes to like -35 or so. But usually it's in that range. What this does is it eliminates sounds like your mouse clicks. For example, let me turn this off. So you can hear your mouse clicks. You might be able to hear keyboard strokes and stuff. So this eliminates all of that background noise. It kind of works like a noise gate, but this one works much better in the sense of compression. So anything that's above -40 in this case here is allowing the mic to open and capture our audio signal. So I'm going to bring this up to like 45, which I think works great. It's in a great kind of great area. Okay, choose what works for you. Now for the attack, I'm going to kind of bring this down to like 1 millisecond because we want the mic to be responsive as quickly as possible. And for the release, I'm going to increase this to like 200 because we don't want the mic shutting down immediately. Sometimes 200 or 250 ms, that's fine. This is a great place to be. All right, so let's set this to 250 and this is fine. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is add a compressor. Now, there's usually a lot of misunderstanding on what a compressor does and how it works. OBS compressor that's built in is pretty okay for most people. So let me quickly give you an explanation of what this does. Okay, so the threshold here indicates that whenever we are above -18 dB, it's going to compress our audio down by the ratio that we are setting here. So for our use case, -18 is quite aggressive because as you can see, anything that's above -18 here is rapidly being compressed by this compressor. So we don't, I mean, it's okay to leave it at the default settings for most people. I don't tend to shout. I have a baby who wakes up, so I mean, I can't shout at home. So I will kind of increase the threshold to -10 and say that whenever I exceed -10, then compress my extra dB by say 4. Okay, what that means is, let's say I increase, I'm above 10 dB by 6, then it's going to compress it to 1.5. Okay, that's what basically a ratio does. So the ratio you set here determines how aggressive the compressor is going to work, and the attack here indicates how quickly a compressor is going to kick in. Usually, you can set it at 10 ms or even 1, but 10 is usually okay. And the release is how quickly you want to release that compression. Again, I generally kind of like leaving this at about 150 ms. But look, all of this is like exploration and testing. So see what works best for you. Now there's another setting on the compressor that says output gain. Usually what happens is when you have a very aggressive setting, the volume gets compressed down a lot, and some people usually want to elevate that using a makeup gain. Here it's called an output gain, but on most compressors it would be called a makeup gain. So they would add some dB of makeup gain to kind of increase the volume. But what this does, it also increases the quietest parts and also your loudest parts. Then what happens is the dynamic range that you have in your audio when you're speaking softly or when you're speaking loudly all kind of tends to sound the same. which kind of makes it more monotonous. I usually have this, don't usually have any output gain unless and until I'm kind of, far away from the mic or something. But for my use case, this works great. But you know what it does, so see what works best for you. All right, so now we have all of these things in place, and as you can see, we are actually above the peaking zone, and that's bad for our audience, right? For people who are listening. Some of them may have earphones, the volume might be turned up. We want to make it comfortable for everyone who's listening to us. So the next thing we're going to do is add something called a limiter. What a limiter does is, as the name suggests, it's going to keep the audio, no matter what you do, at this certain setting that we've set here, which is in my case minus 6 dB. So whatever I do, it's always going to stay at minus 6 dB. It's not going to extend beyond that. So in a way, this is a pretty aggressive compressor. In the back end, usually these guys have like 15 or 12 ratio. Aggressively compresses anything that even gets close to that. So that's what a limiter does. Now, this is where we started. Look how noisy this is. And now this is how we sound. This is how we sound. Now, for most people who live in a quiet environment, who have a pretty decent setup with sound panels and stuff that absorb audio, you don't even need noise suppression, which means that sometimes the S's, the K's and stuff, when you're talking softly, usually gets suppressed by this noise suppression algorithm that we have in place. You don't even need that. Just these three things are going to be perfectly fine. Now, this mic that I'm using is pretty notorious for pretty high sibilance, and I've heard this personally myself. When I look at my videos, when I listen back to them on an earphone, I see a lot of sibilance in the S's and K's and so on. So what I like to do is basically EQ the mic slightly, so I'm able to get exactly the sound I want and sound a bit more professional. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is actually add an EQ, but we're not going to use the 3-band EQ that OBS provides. We're going to use an EQ that's going to come from, this is basically the Reaper's free plugin suite. So what we're going to do is, firstly, let me go to the Reaper plugins. Okay, and when you do that, the first thing you're going to see on Google is RIA plugs. So go to that website. Just download the 64-bit version if you have OBS 64-bit and install it, and it should show up in OBS. If it doesn't, just restart OBS and I'm pretty sure it should show up there. All right, so once you have that, just click on the plus sign, add a VST 2.x plugin here, and under the drop down, what we're going to select is RIA EQ standalone. Okay, so click on that and open plugin interface. All right, so when you open this, usually there's a waveform here. If it doesn't show up, just click on reset defaults and you should see a waveform like how it's showing up on the screen here. All right, so there's a lot of stuff going on here. What's happening? Okay, let's try to understand what each band, what each frequency range does in the vocal audio, right? Now, you will see number 1 here, basically anything from 0 to 100 hertz. Now, if you you can read up on this, and I would encourage you to, so that you can EQ your mic properly. But usually anything from 0 to like a 80 hertz or a 90 hertz is a low rumble, which is kind of the stuff that you get from like a low hum. There's always a hum from everywhere in the environment. There's echo from the walls and stuff. So we don't want that in the audio. We want to cut that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to completely cut this until like 90 hertz. Actually, let me put this at 80. Yeah, this is fine. So 82.9. Okay, so as you can see, anything, all the low rumble that's in that frequency range is being cut off. Okay, now from about 100 to a 500 kilohertz, 500 hertz is actually the warmth in the audio, and we want to increase that. Okay, so if I increase this all the way, you will see that there's a low end that's being added in the audio, and this is kind of the warmth that's there. But when we do EQ increases, Anything from 0 to 5 is like a good EQ increase. Anything above that is will sound made up. Okay, so I like to do 0 to 3, 0 to 4 sometimes, depending on how my mic is performing. And I would leave that up to you to experiment. So we'll go over all of these bands, and then you'll be have a fair enough idea on what you need to do to EQ your mic. Okay, now number 3 is a very interesting zone. Okay, because this is the place where things kind of sound boxy. This is the region where our voice sounds like we're sitting inside a box or something. You'll see what I mean. Let me increase this completely. So now it looks like I'm sitting in a box. Okay, and this is how headset mics usually sound. Now on a condenser mic, we don't want this. So what we're going to do is I'm going to cut this down slightly by about 4 dB. Okay, I don't want to completely cut this off because I want that sound to be there. It's kind of the mid-range, but I don't want the boxiness in my audio. So I'm going to cut that slightly, and that's going to remove some of the boxiness that's there, but still retain the warmth that's coming from the previous, band that we have. All right, so I'm going to now, there's actually one band that's missing here. So let's add a band here, and let's move that to this range. Okay, now usually this range here from about 2000 to about 4000 is the range where there's vocal clarity in our audio. Okay, so if I increase this, you'll see what I mean. So you can hear there's some kind of clarity that's coming in. All right, so we want that. And I'm going to increase this by about 3 dB to add some clarity to our voice. And it may be different depending on the microphone that you're using. So I would encourage you to, again, experiment to see what works best for you. All right, so the next thing is the place where I'm trying to solve a problem with this mic. And this mic is notorious for sibilance. When I listen to my YouTube videos on an earphone, the sibilance is kind of high for some reason. So if your mic has the same problem, then this is the frequency that we should focus on. It's usually 5000 to about 7000, because if you see the screen, right, so that's basically the area where it's actually, you know what, let me cut off the noise suppression. So this is kind of going to capture this much clearly. So you see that beneath number 4, that's the place that we want to cut. Okay, so let me bring that down. Now it's basically says high shelf. I'm going to change that to band, and I'm going to completely bring this down to 4, and I'm going to change the bandwidth to become narrow. Okay, so now that sibilance is being cut completely. Let me bring back noise suppression. All right, actually we should have done this without noise suppression, but it's okay. It still works fine. Now there's another band usually in audio where it's called air, where it's kind of more artistic. So if I take this up, you can hear some of the airy quality of the audio that's coming in. It's kind of a podcasty sound that you're able to hear. I like this, and I kind of want to increase this in my audio, and I'm gonna increase this slightly by about 3 dB. Okay, so this is the place where you can add like creative kind of expression, that kind of stuff. So that's going to be there, and without noise suppression, this works amazing. Okay, so again, I still like to leave it at 3. You see what works best for you, and this is basically how we've EQ'd our mic. Now without the EQ, it basically sounds like this, and with the EQ, it sounds like this. So I think this is a much more professional sounding, although we can tune this slightly, and I would encourage you to experiment with what EQs work best for you. Okay, but when you're doing EQ with Reaper EQ, just make sure that all of the bands have a certain type by default. You want to basically use band where it's appropriate, and high shelf or low shelf where it's appropriate. And you can read up on what these actually mean, but very simply, when you're selecting these, they either cut off something in that region, or they allow something to pass in that region, or you can determine when you select a band on what needs to happen in that region. Okay, so go and read up on that. This is amazing. It's a rabbit hole actually, but it's going to give you much more clarity in your voice, and it's going to make even a pretty inexpensive mic like this sound much more professional. This is how we started off when we plugged in the mic into our computer. And this is how we sound now. I think this is much more professional. And if you're using an XLR mic, unless you have processors or DSPs built into your audio interface, which is amazing. If you don't, if you're running it into like a regular audio interface straight into your computer, you can still use these settings and you should sound amazing. Now, there are some mics which are pretty notorious for being very low sounding usually. Now, if that's your case, what I would suggest is you can add a gain. Adding a gain will basically, once we've cleaned up the signal, when you increase the gain, it's going to increase your audio to a pretty decent amount. Okay, but note that clip, and you're going to still stay in that region. However, when you're speaking so close to the mic, you don't really need this much of a gain. But if you're far off, and you're gaming, and you have you want to keep the mic far away from you, this gain works amazing. Okay, but do keep in mind that because this is a condenser mic, when your mic is away from you, it's going to pick up echo like you can hear now. Okay, and so that's kind of the downside of increasing gain. In my case, I don't need gain because it works fine for me. But if you need gain, then you can add that through this setting. All right, so I hope these settings work for you. And if you have any questions, do leave them in the comment section and I'll do my best to answer. Look, I'm not an expert on this topic, but I'll try my best to answer my questions based on the amount of knowledge I have. So have fun. Hopefully your condenser mic now sounds much better. Thanks for watching. If you like the video, like it. If you dislike it, dislike it. But tell me why in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed, please do subscribe to hear more from me in the future. Thanks a lot for watching. See you next time.